Good morning, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you're watching us from and wherever you're following us from. Welcome to another exciting session of Kikao Junction, organized by Forum Civ, Hub Eastern and Southern Africa. And today I'm glad again to have you all join us for another interactive session. As we discussed the last time that we have pillars within the Kikao Junction, and today we are happy to be discussing the pillar on democracy. So this week we are all aware that we are celebrating or commemorating the International Day of Democracy, which is usually commemorated every 15th of September. And we acknowledge as Forum Civ that democracy cannot only be celebrated in one day. So we have a series of events that we've planned for you the entire week, where we are going to discuss Drive for Democracy and also just be able to explore and reflect on what defending democracy means. From today on Monday, we are going to discuss around partnerships. We talk about partnerships and work with different people, be able to see how we've been able to defend democracy. Then tomorrow, we talk about democracy in the context of COVID-19. How has COVID-19 pandemic shaped Drive for Democracy? We have also a session lined up on women and democracy. And then we have a session on Thursday lined up on youth and democracy. And finally, on Friday, we will also be discussing us on media and democracy. And remember that these sessions are all held under the Kikao Junction. And today we invite you to follow us under the hashtag Defending Democracy. Kikao Junction seeks to be able to provide a platform for reflection, for just sharing ideas, and of also bringing in different people who can be able to show us what has worked and what we can learn from. To start us today, I have Anna Stenkville, our Secretary General. Anna, welcome to this discussion. And to begin us in our talks this week or today, we know that Forum Civ is celebrating 25 years of defending democracy. What does this mean for us as an organization?
Thank you so much, Catherine. I'm so honored to be invited to start off this very, very important week here now we have in front of us with all these different topics you just mentioned that will be discussed. So this is really, really important for all of us. Yes, so I'm the Secretary General of Forum Civ, that is the largest platform organization in Sweden. We have about 145 member organizations, and all of us in one way or another are working with defending democracy and human rights. And we've been doing that for 25 years, as you said, Catherine. And that's really amazing, isn't it? And we can clearly say that we have made a difference for many, many people and from different perspectives as well. And some of the things we're going to talk about during these days, and others, if you want to read about a bit of history, you can find actually the booklet in our website that says 25 years of defending democracy, straight on. So if you would like to read more about that. So that's something to be really, really proud of for us being part of this organization that has been defending democracy and human rights for 25 years.
Thank you, Anna. I think that's very good. We are welcome to read about 25 years of defending democracy in our website. So probably just to look at it, because for Drive for Democracy and defending democracy, we need a vibrant civil society. So in your own opinion, Anna, what is the role and the place of civil society in the 21st century in defending democracy?
I mean, it's everything. It's so crucial. You can't have a proper democracy if you don't have a vibrant and a very active civil society. And we can see this in so many different parts of the world. So, I mean, it's crucial. And this is something that I will talk about all the time when I meet the Swedish politicians and stakeholders and so on, to the need of a vibrant civil society. And you will talk about this even more during these days, and you will meet my colleague from Eastern Europe, Agnin, who will talk more about this. And we can see that quite clear now in Belarus, for example, where, I mean, the things we see happening there is because we have a very active civil society as a fundamental part of the protests that we see now. And this is also something to be proud of, to be part of that. And I think that's also why people like Lukashenko would be very afraid of civil society, because civil society is a big, big power to count on, isn't it?
Yes, so civil society is a big power, and amidst all that, as we defend democracy, there are also challenges that are faced by the civil society, and different challenges across the region. You've clearly talked about Belarus and also different regions, even in Africa. So what do you think are the challenges that are being faced by civil society as they try to defend democracy? But at the same time, again, we see there's a decline in also defending democracy.
Yes, I mean, here we clearly see a shrinking space. And this is the biggest challenge, I would say, for civil society at this time. And it has worsened during the pandemic. Unfortunately, we have seen this in many, many parts of the world. And I have got some very worrisome examples from Kenya, for example, quite early in the pandemic as well, about police brutality and so on. And we also see this now in Colombia. Last week there have been some protests there as well, where they have been discussing or protesting the things about police brutality. We also see, journalists and civil societies and all of these are affected by shrinking space. And during the pandemic, that quite a lot of higher politicians have used the pandemic as an excuse for shrinking it even more. So this is the biggest challenge. And here we need to stick together, and we need to be brave, and we need to sort of perform leadership here as well to be able to combat the different challenges of shrinking space. And this is also something I am raising my voice about when talking to politicians back home here in Sweden as well.
Okay, thank you, Anna. And as you were speaking about the challenges, I was thinking also around the resources. So do you also think that civil society has a challenge in terms of mobilizing resources, and how has that been working, especially for Forum Civ and also other organizations like-minded like us?
Yeah, there you're talking about the second very important challenge for civil society, of course, the funding and the resources. And I mean, resources are many different things. I mean, all the active people, that's one and the biggest resource, and that we have a lot of. So we should be really proud of that. But the money and the funding, that's another big challenge. And here we also, as Forum Civ, for example, we were about to sort of start a big campaign to raise more money, and then we had the pandemic all over us, so it was not possible to do that. So that's, of course, a big challenge. And this is something we're working very much with, and we're increasing now as well, all our efforts in this, to be able to work more with funds, and also to work with it, not only for Stockholm office, but together with the different regional offices around Forum Civ, to be able to collaborate and to exchange ideas and so on, because this is a challenge. Of course, it's a challenge.
Thank you, Anna. And just to remind you, our viewers, that Forum Civ recently changed their name. We were, for the last 25 years, Forum SYD, but now we are Forum Civ, which is Forum for Civil Society. So that means then we play our role in terms of being a platform for bringing civil society together to be able to defend democracy and also deal with other issues of gender equality and human rights. And I just want to again ask you, Anna, as a platform organization, because of course we have the responsibility of bringing together different organizations. So how are we able to strengthen civil society in the drive for democracy? If you have any recommendations, any strategies, or any approaches that we have used as an organization that you think have worked for us in the last 25 years?
Yeah, one thing was, of course, to change our name. And I would imagine that quite a few of you would be quite happy now that we're not having a Swedish word in our name, because SYD, as you said, that means South in Swedish, and that's quite odd to have a Swedish name in a global organization, isn't it? So I'm very happy now that we have Civ instead, because it's telling us much more about what we're doing and the importance of civil society, and that we're representing civil society and acknowledging civil society. And how we will do this to strengthen, I mean, we need to have patience here, because this is a hard work and it takes such a long time. But we need to have dialogue. We need to talk about things, and we need to share ideas as well. And we need to be brave and sometimes a bit uncomfortable as well. And that's partly my job, I would say, to sort of reach out hands to different stakeholders and to speak out about certain topics and so on, but also to collaborate with perhaps people or organizations we was not expected to collaborate with, to be able to reach the goal to defend democracy and human rights. So this with strengthening is also to sort of, I do hope that after this week, all of you will be strengthened, because you have got new ideas, you have been having dialogues with different people also interested in the same things that you are, but you have been listening to all these interesting people and different panels and so on. And that is also a way of strengthening, to give people energy to continue, because of course it feels like a struggle from time to time, because the needs are endless for us to do it, but we need to be there, and we need to be patient, we need to be brave, and we need to show leadership in this.
Yeah, brave is the word there. I pick a lot of the need for people to be brave and come together. And leadership was also key because, again, you cannot have a successful drive for democracy if leadership is not really intentional in terms of being able to then make sure that democracy is achieved. And finally, Anna, just to conclude, if there are any other comments or any other insights that you want to give as we begin this week and as we continue defending democracy as an organization?
I just want to share that there are some very good things that have been done so far. I mean, when I went to visit your regional office or hub, then I got this very nice book, of course, Speaking Truth to Power. And I also had the opportunity to meet Akili Dada, who works with empowering women and women leadership. So many, many good things have been done so far as well. So please share and be very sort of generous with sharing different examples here as well. And we quite recently started a podcast with Inforum SID called Power to Change. And the last episode actually is one of the co-workers at regional office in ESA, and that would be Wilson, who would talk talk Rights Way Forward. And that's really interesting as well, just to listen to how we're working with this. So this is something also I want to talk about, the last words. And by this, I am so proud to be able to be part of this start of this week. And I think by this, Catherine, I just want to declare the week and in the name of democracy for open. And I do wish and hope that you will have fruitful discussions and you will share ideas. And I do look forward to take part of all the conclusions made during this week.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for finding time to join us and for declaring our week open. I pick a few things from your insights there in terms of power to the people and power to change, and also at the same time being able to just organize and work together. And this then seamlessly takes us to our next discussions, because one of the things that we have learned as Forum Civ is the power of dynamic partnerships. As we defend democracy, we do not work on our own. We are a platform organization, and therefore then we work with different organizations. At the same time, also in the hubs where we implement our programs, we work with different partners. So I'm very privileged again to continue this discussion with a group of panelists who experts, I always say, in their own rights, who have made very good contributions in defending democracy over the years and in driving democracy. So I'd like to invite you and welcome you to introduce yourselves. I begin with the ladies first. I see you, Karen. Kindly introduce yourself and tell us what you do, about your organization, before we get into the interview.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for the invitation. My name is Karen Wakoli. I serve at Emerging Leaders Foundation. And at ELF, we basically support young people, young men and women, to be able to be outstanding leaders in society. Those who want to be leaders in politics, in the economic space, in community leadership, in media, in whatever space they want to be in. We support them, we build their capacity, and we run programs around leadership development, good governance and democracy, and livelihoods for both young men and young women. I will be able to share more later. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Karen, and we are glad to have you. And next, I see my colleague, Oji, from Belarus. I know we've all been reading a lot about Belarus in the news lately. So kindly introduce yourself and let us know what you do for Forum Civ.
My name is Ognjen Radonjic, and I assume that would be very difficult for many people to pronounce who are not the Slavic native speakers. So most of the people, that's why I adapted a nickname of Ogi. Most of the people call me that. I am a hub manager, regional manager for Eastern Europe, based in Vilnius, Lithuania. We are working with the wider region, Balkans, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia, supporting civil society, local civil society, as well as partnerships between Swedish and local civil society. As you have seen in recent weeks, it's been already 5 weeks, we have a small velvet revolution going on in Belarus. This is where we are mostly engaged. And civil society there is fighting for democracy as we speak.
Thank you, Oji. And we look forward to hearing more about that as we go on with our interview. Our third panelist is George. George, kindly introduce yourself to our viewers. George, kindly introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. I was trying to unmute the microphone. My name is George Gashara. I am quite happy to be part of this conversation. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Oji, and thank you, Karen. I work for an organization called Hiva Fund, and Hiva Fund is a partner for Forum Civ. At Hiva Fund, we're exploring a new kind of action where we allow artists, practitioners, creators of content, thought leaders to develop what we are calling a new engagement in the public space, to define culture, and also to make a livelihood. I'm quite happy to be in this conversation, and I'm also happy to be a partner of Forum Civ. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. And yeah, as we go on with these online sessions, we learn keywords, muting and muting. So I hope we will keep going. It's the new normal, as we all say. So just as we go into the discussion, our viewers, we are reminding you the hashtag is defending democracy. Kindly follow us on our social media platforms. Feel free also to keep asking questions and comments as we go by. And back to the discussion on defending democracy, we all know and we all talk about that democracy means the rule by the people and giving power to the people and allowing people then to be able to be part of important discussions and decisions in their daily lives. But at the same time, we continue to see that democracy is under threat. So I just want us to be able to discuss why do we keep seeing that democracy is under threat despite all the coalescing actions? Despite all the efforts that we are making, democracy still remains to be under threat. I will start with you, Karen. Why is it still that democracy is under threat?
Thank you for the question. Democracy is still under threat because of many things. Like, we are aware it's the rule of the majority, for the people, by the people. But then what happens when the people are not well informed about what it means to vote, who to vote for? What does it mean when the majority are not aware about the power of the media and the place of the media in society and how the media shapes engagement and discourse in society? What does it mean when women, young people, persons with disability are marginalized and are discriminated against when it comes to participation in political spaces and processes and making their voices heard? So all these things basically boil down to some of the reasons why we're seeing democracy is actually under threat. The critical thing would definitely be to educate the masses, because I think in a big way, political leaders and politicians basically take advantage of the masses and keep them uninformed and make decisions for them and basically put them down. And one of the key contributing factors is basically inequality, poverty, places, the place of economic power and economic being of the individual people. And that is why I think a lot of times around elections time, we find political leaders buying votes from people or bribing people or using money to get themselves into office. So then that means that people who are well-meaning, people who have a track record, people who are accountable, people who observe human rights and dignity would not get elected or voted in simply because they don't have the money to bribe or pay or do all that stuff for them to be voted in. So there's so much work to be done around just making sure that the public is well informed and well educated and that they get to engage constructively in the different political processes. And I hear a lot of people, and sometimes young people, saying, politics doesn't concern me, I will not engage in politics. I think that is so foolhardy, because politics defines the quality of life we live. whether we go to school, whether we access healthcare or not, whether we get jobs or not, whether we have secure shelter or not, whether our human rights and dignities are dignified or not. It is all a question of politics. So we must all be aware, we must learn, we must have the quest to know, to want to know, and to ask the difficult questions. Yes, over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Karen. You bring in different perspectives there: inequalities, lack of information, knowledge, issues around young people not being shying away from political processes. And I'm looking at you, George. And as you introduced yourself, you talked about how Haverfund looks at it differently. Like you try different approaches and different methods. So I know you work a lot with the creatives, also a lot in the economic sector. So why is still democracy under threat? Despite all the different ways that we are trying to be able to challenge some of the issues that we are facing.
Thank you, Karen, for your thoughts and for setting a critique, definitely looking at the political dimension of democracy. And thank you, Catherine, for inviting me to make some observation. I'll particularly focus my observations around a cultural critique, because we exist in a cultural, economic, political, and social dimensions. And I'm sure my other colleagues in the conversation will enrich this debate. Young people all over the world, and especially here in Africa, are yearning for avenues and opportunities through which they can tell their stories, transform their narratives, and dignify their lives. This is, for me, the basis for defining the place of democracy in a citizen's reality. Rooted in the aspiration of a good life, this yearning of a good life is shifting the thoughts around where people want to work, what kind of work they want to do, what kind of families they want to set up, how they want to bring up their children, what their children will be eating, what books we read, how we dance, how we walk in the streets, what we wear. These are deeply democratic decisions, and they might seem small or individual, but at the very micro level, the book I am reading, the music I am listening to, my ability to interact with my friends, those are all cultural but also democratic decisions. We've seen in many contexts where people struggle. You go to other contexts, they cannot listen to music. Their music is prescribed by different people. They cannot play certain games because their gender restricts them. They cannot do a thing or the other. So the idea of yearning for opportunity and avenues and defining these opportunities and avenues roots our ideas of democracy. In Kenya, we have a robust political and social arrangement that's defined by our new constitution. I don't think it's new anymore. It's 10 years old, but then we like to call it new constitution. But when you think about the new constitution, the bigger part of this constitution was to transfer the ability of people, individuals, to sustain an active civic culture, to define culture, to define citizen engagement, to define language, to define accountability. And this is what I define as democracy. I don't look at it as a single event of voting, but I look at the cumulative small number of events that we take every day for granted that accumulate to our culture, to our way of life, to the rhythm that we live as our city. So my engagement really comes from a place of culture and art. And why is this? The arts and the culture play a very central role in helping us construct critical personal decisions. It is in art, it is in culture that we access reflection on our city. When Sauti Sol sing about inequality, we remember that yourself and your house help have different realities. The ladies who, the person who has no income, the person who's been mistreated in a justice process, a person who's been manhandled by the city council, the art help us to be alive and to be aware of the realities of other people. It is this that helps us to suggest solutions, or to grieve, or to roar in pain and anger, and to know when things are not fair, and to speak out, and to encourage that everyone in society to feel along one another, to build solidarity, and to define this thing we call country, this place we call home. So for me, the role of culture is to construct the many small relationships that allow us to belong. So art persuades us when things are wrong, but it also points on how we can make things right and when we can make things whole, even if it's for a fleeting moment, whether it's through a documentary, whether it's through civic action, whether it's through music. And these are the things that build democracy. And so I believe that as a country at 50 years of age, while we like to compare ourselves to people who have had 400 years of perfecting their union, we must not just look at the contribution of politicians, but we must also invest in the agency of the citizens. As I conclude my opening remarks, Karen talked about inequality. A lot of people defined democracy from the view or the vantage point of the post-World War II scenario. And democracy was seen as state sovereignty and boundaries and militaries and elections. But so many years after the idea of the Second World War arrangements have been dealt with, we are in a new space. And this new space requires us to look deeply as to how we live with one another as human beings, how we treat the climate as a place in where we live, how we deal with inequality so that we don't have people who have a lot and others who live in abject poverty, creating a lot of stress and strife in this project called nationhood. We need to also think about the expansion of individual rights, because we've seen a lot of individual rights are being clawed back on, whether it's from a perspective of religion or religious fundamentalism or rabid nationalism that's spreading across the country. We must protect the rights of women. We must protect the rights of minorities, because all these are human beings, they are citizens, and they have rights just like anyone else. So in a small way, we contribute to allowing young people, creatives, thinkers, writers, people who create and define our culture, to run enterprises, to produce cultural goods and services, to define our cities, and to make a living by doing that. So thank you for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from my colleagues.
Thank you very much, George. Bring again new dimensions there around democracy, not just only being a political process, but the fact that we all in our daily lives go through democratic processes. And I think the key thing is that democracy is needed to defend our fundamental freedom and our fundamental rights. I think that is not disputed, that at the household level, at the national level, all through. Yeah, but the key thing is at the micro level, because micro is then what makes the macro. So if we don't tackle it at the micro level, then it could be also challenging for us to deal with it at the macro level. I come to you, Oji, and looking at the situation, you bring fresh energy again from Belarus. And I think it's a classic example of people power the last 5 weeks. But still, why is democracy remaining a threat despite all the gains? And I think for you, you can give us quite good examples of what has been going on in Belarus. Yeah, welcome, Oji.
Thank you, Catherine. I would refer back to the first sentence you said when you were introducing this session. You said that we are celebrating or commemorating democracy. And in the topic of the discussion, why is it still under threat? Now, in my view, we should not be commemorating democracy because it's not dead yet. But we should not be celebrating it either because it's not achieved yet. And democracy, in my view, will always be under threat. If it is a rule of majority, it will always be under threat by the small, powerful, and rich minority. And we will always have in the world very small, powerful, and rich minority that will always want to absorb more power from majority, who is usually less fortunate and less rich. And in my view, this is the process that will never finish, and democracy will always be under threat. My colleagues mentioned now education, culture, but also George mentioned tradition of democracy of 400 years. And even in those societies, democracy is under threat, and it is attacked by populism, by nationalism, by especially in 21st century, by trolling, by internet memes, by any kind of means that rich and powerful would use to absorb more power. What we have, on the other hand, is a vast majority of people that have to be educated and given opportunity to claim their rights and to claim their democracy. And this is perhaps what is going on now in Belarus. Just as a quick background, Belarus is the country that came out from Soviet Union, has the same president for 26 years, and it is the same exactly the Stalinist system that existed for 70 years earlier. That authoritarian regime is met now by a huge outrage of usually young people who have been educated, who have access to information, who have access to social media, and who are aware that their rights are violated and that they have the right to choose how their country should be moving on. And this is again, in my view, process in a sense that never finishes. Even if they overthrow this regime now and they install another democratically voted in, soon enough that regime will probably need checking up. And these checks and balances provided by civil society towards the government is essentially what democracy is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Oji, and also for again reminding us that democracy is constantly under threat. So as we celebrate again, we still remember that it's part of our life. It's constantly under threat. People are seeking power, and I think you've talked about also the power of the majority. You know, those the few that then are in power, then being able to not allow for democracy to thrive. We have Bishop Mambo. From Zambia. I think you are now with us. Welcome on board, Bishop. I would ask you to introduce ourselves to our viewers and then go straight into the discussion of why again democracy is still under threat. I've followed a bit of your work in Zambia and trying to put power in people and asking people to really come out and defend democracy. So welcome, Bishop.
Thank you. We have had some challenges with our communication, and please, we ask for forgiveness. But we've been following, and we're so grateful for what we've received so far. Thank you for all listeners.
Okay, so Bishop, just continue with our discussion in terms of why do we continue to see democracy under threat despite all their coalescing efforts? Despite all the efforts that we are doing, why is democracy still under threat?
I think democracy in Zambia is in deep waters for one simple reason. you take politics as a source of employment, not to serve your people. Because democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and to serve the people. But you find that when you go into democracy in Africa, the end result is you end up having to come up with leaders who are not leaders. They themselves becoming dictators. And at the end of the day, the people are suffering instead of serving them. In short, you go into politics in Africa when you yourself are in trouble. The majority of us entering politics, those who are entering politics, they are really, really poverty-stricken. And once they have the opportunity, instead of them serving the people, they are there to enrich themselves. First is me, second is my wife, third is my family, and then so forth and so on. And even the language changes, because true Democrat is there to serve, and even the language is that of servanthood. So you are called to serve in a democracy. But you don't see that in Africa. And moreover is that the majority of the young people, your age group, have no interest in it. It is us in the last hour who goes in. And what do we go in there for? Is to amass wealth for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, which should not be the case. As a result, we are seeing that the language of politicians in Africa is that of insulting each other, a tribal politics and so forth, instead of joining in talking about things that would be in a position to help us. We should adopt democracy of embracing a spirit where you would be accommodative to all those that want to serve the nation. As a result, we are really, really remaining behind in our democracy in this part of the world.
Thank you, Bishop, and you bring in actually a very, again, important aspect of as we drive for democracy in terms of the behavior of our leaders and the issues around accountability and authoritarian leadership and all that corruption, every bit of it. But as we continue the discussion, we've been talking about people power. So a lot of it, we've talked about democracies, the power, giving people the agency. And again, as civil society organizations, we come together then to mobilize people to make sure they have information, they have knowledge, but and they're aware of what the actions they need to take. But again, we end up also being criticized sometimes that we are not able to translate people's desires for democracy to tangible actions. So in the work that you have done, all of you, I just want to get your sentiments in how are we able to successfully stimulate people's agency, and how do we translate people's desires for democracy into tangible actions and not just pieces of information that we hold in our offices most of the time as we are accused. How do we translate that into tangible actions? I want to start with Oji, probably because you've just come from action. Just want to know how are we able to translate that?
It is also about the momentum in history and in time, that democracy, that people need to step up to defend or achieve democracy. In my view, and I'm a great fan of grassroots actions and grassroots activism, translating people's anger or people's desire into tangible actions, in my view, requires work on the grassroots. And sometimes, like you said, the civil society is accused of not channeling this views of the ordinary people. But in my view, I think any action that challenges authority is the path towards democracy. And this is what civil society does in so many ways. The cultural workers putting a TV show or a puppet show that mocks leaders. That is a part of democracy. Environmental group that is fighting against cutting trees, that is part of democracy. The education of youth, even if it is in creative arts or it's in language classes, empowers people towards democracy. So there are many, many, many ways how civil society can translate people's thoughts and people's anger into the actions. Regardless which one of those is, they are all contributing a little bit towards democracy. When I visited Kenya last year, I had opportunity to see many of these actions. And some of those actions you may not think are directly related to democracy, but in my view, they are. Even if it is a TV show, even if it is a tweet, even if it is a small workshop for young girls, it is all empowering. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oji. And then talking again about grassroots. If I come to you, Karen, there's a comment here, and because you work a lot with young people, Joey says tomorrow's leaders' narrative must be a thing of the past. If the young leaders want to fight democracy, the tomorrow is now. So in your work, Karen, as we respond to the question, how do we translate these actions, these people's desires into tangible actions? You work along a lot with young people, and Joey here says the tomorrow for young people is now. What's your sentiments on that?
I totally agree with Joey. There's nothing like tomorrow's leaders. Young people are the leaders of today and the partners of tomorrow. So there's nothing like tomorrow. Tomorrow is a fallacy. I have had the opportunity to work with people across ages from 10 to as old as 70, 80. And it's always interesting to hear 80-year-olds saying, when we were growing up, we were told we are leaders of tomorrow, and we kept waiting for tomorrow, and that tomorrow never came. So saying that young people are leaders of tomorrow, that's a fallacy. So young people, wherever you are, you are the leader of today. So rise up, do what you can in your own space to make a difference. Don't wait for tomorrow. It will never come. And if it does, it may never be yours, because we have generations coming and going, generations coming and going. So your time is now. Your time is now. And back to your question, Catherine, what can we do to build the agency of the masses, the population, the young people, the children, men, everybody as part of the population? At Emerging Leaders Foundation, I just mentioned earlier that part of our programming is around building the capacities of young people to be able to engage constructively. Because a lot of times, and I have seen that this actually cuts across the African region, not just in Kenya, but many of the African countries experience this, a situation where around election time, that's when young people become attractive to the political class. They get paid to make noise, to cause chaos and all that, and very few of them get to engage constructively. So what we do, and what I have seen many other civil society organizations working with young people do, is that we break down information for and to the young people about governance. What is devolution? What does it mean to engage? Do you have a voice? Everybody does have a voice, but then for some, it takes calling out that voice in them or calling out the leader in them to realize that, oh, I actually have a voice, my voice matters, and I can be able to make my voice heard. I can hold a leader to account. We tackle subjects such as Pan-Africanism. A lot of times we have seen many young people fleeing the continent, going to other parts of the world in search of opportunities and maybe even dying along the way. Yet there are many, many opportunities on this continent. And we ask the question, we are Africans. What makes us African? Is it that we were born in Africa? Is it that we were African prince? Or what makes us African? And what is our role as the generation of today in redefining the African story? Because we have to redefine it. We have to create the solutions for the challenges we have in society today, and not sit back and wait for some person from some other part of the world to come and give us resources and give us solutions. Because for as long as we are dependent on external help to be able to find our solutions, our minds will begin to die and we will be of no good to ourselves. So we have the solution within ourselves. So partly that is what we teach and we mentor young people and young leaders in. Of course, issues around constitutionalism, good governance, accountable leadership, human rights. Having an awareness of this is really, really critical, so that then when your rights are infringed upon, you actually can know where to go to raise issue or report whatever has happened and stuff like that. So information is key. So breaking down information around the constitution, around governance, around voice, around agency, around participation, that is definitely key. Something else, in terms of just building agency among the populace and the population, is definitely building stronger civil society organizations. World over, civil society organizations play a key role. We have religious institutions. I can see Bishop here. We have the media. We have the private sector. We have the state. But then civil society plays a critical role. And it's so amazing right now across the globe. I see tendency towards building stronger movements and solidarity to just make sure that what is happening in Zimbabwe, what is happening in Kenya or in Egypt or wherever else in the world, there is support and there's voice by civil society organizations. But one of the biggest challenges that, in fact, I think Anna also alluded to, is around financing for civil society organizations. I have observed with a lot of concern that many of funders or partners only finance programs around democracy, around civic education, when it is 6 months or 1 year to voting time or election time. But then throughout the rest of the years, we're quiet, we're doing nothing. Democracy is not an event, it's a process. Like George said, it's the little things that we do every day, building stronger institutions, building agency and voice in women, in young people, in children. It's those little things that, so it therefore means that this is a lifelong process. It doesn't have to be something that just happens in a single day or a couple of months. And I think what has been one of the challenges for civil society organizations is that you get grants to be able to run activities around programming, but not for institutional capacity building. So that then when the funds dry off, the organization dies. And that's why I think we're seeing such a high turnover when it comes to civil society organizations. So can, like, for instance, Forum Civ decide that, you know, from today, we're going to be focusing on just institutional capacity building for civil society organizations. I am sure you're doing that, but you can be able to do more. And just talking to other partners as well who might be watching this would be critical. Something else that is also really, really important. I took part many years ago, about 10 or so years ago. I was a little more active in the political space, and I took part in exchange programs with young people in the political space within the continent and outside the continent. And Catherine, I was in shock, but I was also really, really amazed to go to some parts of the world, like in Europe, and you find children as young as 12, 13, 14, 15 are members of a youth league. They are voting, they are educating other young people about the need for them to engage, and they are doing some really, really amazing stuff. They understand what politics means and what it means to engage. Even here in Africa, countries such as Botswana, Egypt, South Africa, I saw a more enlightened engagement of young people within the political space, and meshing that up with what's happening in the cultural space, in the private sector, in academia, in government, mashing that up to just understand that, oh, by the way, politics is all around, and the need to be more aware then informs how we are able to engage. And partly in a big way, that's why Emerging Leaders Foundation started, that how can we support young people to engage in the political space constructively, in the governance space in a constructive way, because it is possible, it can be done, it has been done elsewhere. And if we want to promote democracy and reap positive results, then we really have to fold our sleeves and do the hard work. It's not easy. Authoritarian regimes are rising every single day. You just need to look across the region, the African region, maybe even the East African region, and see some of those tendencies coming up. Political parties as institutions of accessing political power and even just governing when it comes to the political space are actually losing their power. The place of ideologically driven politics is actually waning and waning and waning. And it is time to actually have young people, men and women, and even children who are ideologically driven and understand that, if I am a social democrat, this is what it means. If I am subscribing to this other way of governance, this is what it means. And so the value system around that is also really, really critical. We have the political structure where I think values are thrown off the window and it's survival for the fittest. I know that is the reality of politics, but we can do better. We can begin to redefine what happens in the political space. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that. And I see Kisumu Progressive Youth agreeing with you and say to nurture democracy in Africa, the youth should step out of their comfort zones to drive the political agenda at all levels instead of serving the interests of other people. And I think the key word here is about also the gains, the interest that people have. And coming to you, George, again, the challenges we are facing, why we are not able to stimulate people's desires and give them and translate these tangible actions. Bobson Fadhili here says democracy has been used for gains by individual persons, thereby making it hard for the community members to get the fruits of it, not only in Kenya and worldwide. So could that be one of the challenges that we face in terms of now being able to translate these desires into tangible actions? George, your sentiments?
Thank you. I am following this conversation and a lot is going through my mind. And I'm also reading to see what our listeners and viewers are saying. And I can see a couple of words coming up. A word like failed, democracy has failed to deliver. That's Jackson. Someone else says democracy is in decline. Someone else called Agan is saying that we have failed to find new ways of organizing. People revert to ethnicity and negative competition. And I start to ask myself, what are our expectations of democracy? What is the construction of the idea of democracy in our minds? And to answer that, I'll refer back to three things. The first thing is the question of norms. Democracy is a set of norms, a set of agreements that when we are driving on the road, we will stay on the right side only until we cross to the other side for the other direction. And everyone agrees that that's the case, that the pedestrian has a right of way everywhere. That is democracy, and everyone agrees to that. And so the question I have is, how do we build norms as a society? That it is a norm for women to have the same right of voice, of employment, of cultural participation as men, as a norm. How do we build norms? The other question that I have to ask is, how do we define our political culture? Because all these questions of ethnicity, negative competition, aggression, winner takes all are around how we practice our political culture. And that differs from place to place. So when you think about the construction of norms, when you think about the question of political culture, and then finally, how do we define as public space? Because I'm seeing a lot of conversations concern the public. And so my reflection will be around the building and the construction of norms, the creation of a political culture, and the existence of a true public space. So let's think about norms, even at the household level. Do people in a house agree that after dinner, people should wash dishes for themselves? As simple as that, whether it's the father of the house or the mother of the house and the children. And if you can hold yourselves to account that everyone after breakfast washes their own cups. And you can see that as a political process, as at a domestic level, then how do you assume that we will create a larger political process in the country of washing our dishes after an election, accepting that some lose, some win? So that's how I look at it. How do we construct our norms at a household level and at a national level? And we need a curriculum of understanding everyone, like Karen said, from young children to the adults, have a right and have a place. And in our societies, we see that we have conflicts, and conflicts is that we do not have shared norms. That is also extended to our political culture. The idea of bullying, the idea of thuggery, the idea of ethnic organizing is that we haven't agreed, or at least we are building a logic. One logic is that we should be better than ourselves, and another logic says that we can still win even if we are not better than ourselves. So at the heart of democracy is the building of norms, the building of cultures, and then defining what is a public space. In this country, the public space has been one of the most contentious debates. And I'll raise the question of the public space in many ways. Some people would think of it as Uhuru Park, but I'd like to extend it further beyond physical public space. A few years ago, women said that it is my right to wear what I choose. Public space, where does it stop? Does it stop on the body of the person? Does it stop outside of the body of the person? Does it stop in the corporate place in which we exist? When Karen is told you cannot wear your natural hair to go to Barclays Bank and get employment, is that public space? So we have to define what is individual space and accept it, and what is public space, so that the sexuality of an individual is private space. The body of a person is private space. The voting decision of a person is private space. And so we conflate in this country and in most African countries what is public and what is private. And some people take disproportionate real estate in the public. They grab public land. They dictate what other people do, whether it's through religion, whether it's their dominant cultures. So it's important to think about the practice of democracy from a norms perspective, from a culture, a political culture perspective, and from what is public space and what is private space. And so if we think about it conceptually that way, then we can start to know that the expansion of individual freedoms is critical. The expansion of dialogue spaces is critical. The expansion of spaces in which people create norms around cooperation, around volunteering, around giving back to their own societies, around protecting what is shared, whether it's cultural, IP, or whether it's public investment. So then eventually, over time, we are not disappointed by our own practice of democracy, because democracy has not failed anyone. It is our own practice of our own democracy that is failing us, is failing our aspirations. You go to Rwanda, people clean their streets. No one is paid to clean their streets. They are not paid by Forum Civ. They are not paid by the UNDP to clean their streets. And they celebrate their democracy by saying it is the cleanest country in Africa and perhaps the world. But that's not a public. It's not a civil society funded program. It is individual culture. And so what my reflection is that if we have common aspirations, we build norms around them, and then we build a political culture around them where we know what to respect, what is in contention, and what is unacceptable. Then we have a practice of this domestic place we call Kenya, of this domestic shared space called Africa. And we do not necessarily have to always expect to be fed by someone else's money or charity or support, but the culture is ours, the life is ours. So thank you for allowing me to also introduce a cultural critique to the practice of democracy.
George, I wish to just interject there. You said that democracy has not failed anyone. So, in other words, are you saying we have failed ourselves? Would that be accurate?
Say that if we desire as a household to wash our dishes after our meals, then it takes us to find the best way possible for this family to wash our dishes after meals. Does that mean that when children have finished eating, they can't go to class, and those that are not in school to do the first round of dishes? Does it mean that the family has to make sure that there's running water, or there is a container that has water, so that the person washing the dishes is able to do that? If that person is unable to do it standing, can they do it seated? You know, so our aspiration of our own democratic practice has to be what we define, how we define, how we make it possible for ourselves to achieve it, and then we achieve it. But sometimes I find that we want leaders who do not steal, but we do not produce the leaders who do not steal. And then we are disappointed because we do not produce them. We want to empower women, but we still want a culture that makes men predatory, and we do not change that culture. And then we say that we cannot pass the 2/3 rule at parliament, but it's because even at the household level, we are unable to accept that the woman can sleep on the right side of the bed, not only on the left side of the bed. I mean, we must match our aspiration to our culture and to our practice. And that's the only way we can deliver this democracy, because it's not an event. It's a process of becoming better people. And so that would be my response.
Okay, thank you. I would have loved to continue that line of conversation, but I see we have a host, so.
Karen, you can sleep on the right side of the bed.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you so much, George and Karen, for that quite interesting discussion. And George, I think the message you're trying to drive home is our norms, our culture, that we don't wake up one day and expect miracles, and yet we've not been practicing democracy in our households. So it really begins at that household level and or at that very low level, the micro level. So we don't expect accountable leaders to show up one day from heaven and just drop and now they become accountable. We are struggling in Kenya right now. I saw a comment on revenue allocation. So probably if we didn't know how to share bread in the house when we were young, one bread out of 8 children, then how do we expect to share national resources? So quite interesting. Norms, culture, how we are socialized, how we translate that it's work. And I read a comment here from Mary Murigi saying, yeah, I agree that every action is a win and all opportunities should be exploited. Yeah, so like we have to really explore different opportunities. And we seem to have lost a bishop due to connectivity. I would have loved to hear his comments in terms of also the role of the religious the religious groups. I don't know if Bishop, you are back. I see he's trying to join the conversation, but we may just continue due to time. And just to remind you that the topic today is the power of dynamic partnerships in defending democracy. And our viewers, you can see from the discussions we are having, different groups of people. Karen talking passionately about young people, George reminding us about our culture, creativity, norms, the different opportunities, and of course Oji from Belarus talking about populism and the people power, like the power social movements. So as we move the discussion, I'd like us to now go much deeper in terms of seeing what are the emerging partnership strategies in the drive for democracy. What do we think what are we seeing coming out and what is working? And as we go forward, as we defend democracy, what are these partnerships and what are these strategies that we think are working? I'll start with you, Oji.
Thank you, Catherine. Now, here is perhaps where I can direct a little bit of criticism towards civil society. At least in our region, civil society tends to be self-isolating or self-ghettoizing. Usually it is preaching to the choir in so many ways. Civil society and leaders of civil society gather together with other civil society. They form partnership with other civil society. They form partnership with international civil society, and they keep themselves in a ghetto, self-imposed and self-isolated. In the case of Belarus, obviously, this is not only self-imposed. This is very much imposed by the government, but it is also constraining civil society into its own little group. What I would strongly recommend, and this is partly something that happened in the last 2 years, for example, in Belarus, and this is also why we see this result now, branching out for civil society from the ordinary partnerships. When I say ordinary, that would mean local organization with the international organization, coalitions of local NGOs, but branching out from this usual circle of friends and partners into small businesses, into working with cultural organizations, into working with religious organizations, broadening your horizons and broadening your field of partners means also broadening field of supporters. Even if it is working with social organizations that have nothing to do with the rights, this is still broadening your base of support. And this is something that happened in Belarus for the last 3 to 4 years, perhaps, when civil society started working a lot with cultural organizations and artists, with galleries of modern art, but even more started working with the very emerging IT sector. Now, Belarus, despite being a dictatorship, had developed a very strong IT sector. Majority of people working in this sector are well-off, well-paid, well-educated young people in the age range of between 20 and 30. They have very comfortable lives because they are working from their home. They are working for Google or Facebook or many other international corporations. They are paid well. So they don't necessarily have any need to change anything in society. But also by their status, they also gain the power or willingness to claim power and claim rights. And this is where civil society started branching out, giving the view of how rights should be respected and what democracy actually means. And the interesting now development during these couple of weeks, the first week of protests was massive protests on the street and a very harsh crackdown by the police. Beatings, arrests. Only in 2 days they arrested 7,000 people in a city of 2 million. The next what happened is that many of the IT businesses came up and offered help. They came up to pay bills for people who were beaten, hospital bills. They stepped up to pay fines that were imposed by courts. They stepped up to pay even salaries for people who were fired because of their political activism. And this is a very clear example how business, and this is quite a big business, IT sector, supports democracy. At the same time, for example, Catholic Church also became a strong supporter. People gathered in the main square where the church stands, a building. When police started beating them, many of them ran into the church to hide. And then the church came under pressure by the authorities as well for sheltering protesters. So this is then again the church steps up to protect people. And these are the partnerships that are needed. Maybe they are only temporary in these kind of situations, and perhaps tomorrow when these IT businesses grow too big and when they start violating workers' rights, there will be a need to confront them. But at this time, it is important to form this kind of partnership. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Oje. You again bring in that perspective of partnerships and dynamic partnerships, talking about the church, talking about the vibrant IT sector. And I think, yeah, as I said, I was following a bit of what is going on in Belarus. And as much as it was interesting that as much as the internet was shut down, people were still able to organize and mobilize and show up in the streets in numbers. And that was use of alternative ways of communication. And so I go again to the same question to Karen, looking at what are the emerging partnerships in the drive for democracy. And looking at a comment here that talks about, there's a comment I saw here from one person saying that democracy, what is democracy? It is vivid and with no explainable doubt that in Kenyan context, democracy has no tangible meaning. So if it has really no tangible meaning, and we are working here, putting up strategies, and I also like that, OJ, you began also by criticizing ourselves as civil society organization, that sometimes we are in this self-isolation, that thinking that we are actually working on strategies, but we are not. So Karen, what is your take, and what is your experience in terms of emerging partnerships in the drive for democracy?
Thank you for that question. And I wish to start the response by reading a comment from one of the members of the public who said,
Karen?
who is Duncan Onyango. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Duncan Onyango in the chat has said, I must say that strategic partnerships is the key to building social movements in advocating for good governance and democracy. So that's really, really important. I had to read that. Strategic partnerships. Anna also mentioned about strategic partnerships. One of the SDGs clearly is about strategic partnerships. And increasingly in this world today, as we progress and as we advance, there's no way one sector can work on its own and be able to provide solutions to the challenges facing society. Civil society on its own cannot. Private sector on its own cannot. The state on its own cannot. Academia, media, community organizations, no. On our own as operating in silos, just like Oji talked about earlier, it can't happen. Sustained growth and advancement and solutions to challenges we face in society, and right now we're talking about democracy, would have to be found by strategically coming together and working together, building on our competitive advantages as institutions, as individuals, to then provide the solutions. And I see a lot of strength in grassroots organizations and movements, but they face a lot of challenges. I heard Weji talking about what he thinks the power of grassroots organizing and movements are. Even here in Kenya, and I've observed in a few other African countries, grassroots organizing is really, really key, because national organizations and regional organizations can have their impact at the national level or at the regional level. But unless those policies are translated down to the common man, woman, and child down there on the ground, it makes no meaning. It makes no sense. Let me give you an example. So we have the African Peer Review Mechanism. It's a platform where African governments come together to peer review each other around democratic governance, media pluralism, gender mainstreaming, and things like that. But then that is happening at the regional level, but how many young people or children or even men and women down there in our communities at the grassroots level understand that there's something called African Peer Review Mechanism, or even the African Union, or some of those things at the national level, the macro level of engagement? Grassroots engagement and partnership with national organizations are really, really important. So that is the first, I think, point of collaboration and convergence. There needs to be grassroots organizations as well as national organizations just working together, channeling information, building capacity, and sharing information. That is key. The other level of partnership that I feel is really, really critical is intergenerational engagement. I have had the privilege of sitting down or being in spaces where children and young people have sat together with all the men and women who've gone before us in society and who've left a mark, and just had conversations. Where did they go wrong? What can we do differently? Because if we keep doing the same things the same way over and over and expect that, democracy will advance suddenly, or that we will no longer be living in poverty, or that women will be included and minority groups will be included in different spaces, just like that, it may not happen. So intergenerational dialogues and engagement would really, really be important. The other bit, now this one is a challenge, I think, to all of us. I realize that many of us target marginalized groups. So either some programs are going to informal settlements, some are going to the grassroots and rural counties and regions in our various countries. But I feel like the middle class kind of has power, but how many of us ever target the middle class? Because they have the power in terms of the know-how, the expertise, the exposure, the networks, and sometimes the finances. But then they're the same people who end up not voting, for instance, around election time. But how can we also target the middle class and actually show them that their involvement and their interest in whatever happens around democratic practices and processes would actually impact on their lives? So the reality is it actually does, but then unless we're able to break that down for the middle class, they may never be able to get it. And I feel like we would be able to make a lot of progress if we got the middle class on board as well as a strategic partner. And then lately, I've also seen consortiums coming up made up of private sector. So private sector guys then bring in the money, and then the academia doing the research and enabling evidence-based decision-making and programming, which is really, really critical. Media engagement, state engagement as well. So all those strategic partners, consortiums, that is the way to go. The best way to make a change and lead change and sustain it is in partnerships. We cannot do it alone. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Karen. And I read a comment here from Jackson Obare, who says it will be necessary to develop stronger partnerships both at the global level, in regional context, and at country level, with all key actors in support of democracy. Inclusive partnership is the way to go. I think that's what you are alluding to, Karen, in terms of different groups of people. There are people, probably groups that we've left out, the middle class or the other groups of elites, and also at the grassroots level that would have a lot of information but probably are left out. And the issues of IT have come up a lot, internet and use of technology. So Bishop, welcome back. I will come to you so that I don't want to lose you again because of network connectivity. So I want to come to you. We have been talking about key issues in terms of translating people's desires into tangible actions. And now we are also talking about strategic partnerships and approaches. And while you are away, Bishop, we talked a bit about the role of the religious institutions in these partnerships. And Oje gave a very good example of Belarus, where the church came in to house people. Again, the church was also criticized again. So I just want to hear your sentiments, Bishop, in terms of how we translate people's desires into tangible actions. At the same time, also what you see in terms of emerging partnership strategies. Welcome, Bishop. Bishop, can you hear us?
Hello?
Yes, go on, Bishop, loud and clear.
Yes, I have followed your discussion, and it's quite interesting to know that we have a future in the young people knowing what is wrong and what is good for our continent of know about some other countries, but in our country, really is where we cannot accommodate our policies of late is to enrich yourself, where corruptions become a song and you're not ashamed of. you're trying to follow the other British language where it says, send a thief forefront to justify what I would term myself evil, for judgment and vengeance is for God. People are hate, and the politics today is to injure itself and so forth. What I've seen in Belarus, for example, is that people are demonstrating peacefully. As a result, even the church will be able to accommodate them. One wonders will it happen in some of our African countries. And for Zambia, sadly, is that we've seen a freedom struggle being supported by us. And upon gaining independence, the father who supports Zambia then become a small child. What I would wish, what I would pray for is that we should grow our politics. You cannot have a country, for example, as 56, 57 years of independence. Still, you can't accommodate. The other sister talked about the idea of hiding our identity. Right now in America, they are going towards election in November. Democrats or Republicans, if they find a wrong in their own candidate who is a Republican, they will come out, remaining Democrats, to say, don't vote for the current president for the reasons given. I would endorse a Vice President Biden. Now, to me, that becomes a pipe dream. You would never witness that in Africa.
Okay, we seem to have lost Bishop due to connectivity, but I think his sentiments have been heard loud and clear in terms of being able to call each other out, call our leaders out, and yeah, some of the progressive leadership in terms of how honest are we even in our conversations, that we are able then to say this is wrong and this is right. So I want us to move forward in the discussion. But George, someone here still wants you to elaborate more before we talk about the strategic partnerships. Amazi Jelimo says, George, could you please highlight how to build and mobilize around the norms and political culture?
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for asking me to consider Mercy Jelimo's particular question on mobilizing around norms and possibly a political culture. I would like to start by saying that when my colleagues spoke, they raised, and I will say this also addressing Mercy's question. And the reason I want to respond by asking questions is because we all must reflect, because we all have different places within this building this practice, and they don't sound the same, but we are contributing to the same democratic culture. When people talk about organizations and when they talk about organizing, I hear sometimes we are conflating those two. When people mention the limits or the limitations of civil society organizations and organizational culture, they kind of reflect, albeit unsuccessfully, to what they might want to talk about, which is organizing. So if your object is changing state capture and changing or interacting with institutional change, say courts, say sovereign states, then you organize accordingly. And for a long time, and especially in the last 20 years, in most countries in sub-Saharan Africa, they've been trying to change the approaches of central government. And so by response, civil society has taken an institutional format. And so the limitations of institutional format become the limitations of the civil society movement. But I'd like to say that those are different. In other countries, we've seen, like in Egypt, during the last dynamic public action, they did not use institutionalized forms of organizing. They used non-institutional, and their limitations were also non-institutional limitations. And so, especially in Kenya and in funded civil society, the limitations of funding, power relationships between donors and recipients, power relationships between classed professional organizers and beneficiaries, those seem to be the limitations of civil society. And that's another conversation. So I'm trying to bring the critique of when we think about civil society, we probably think it in context, and our context is very specific, but that's not the shared context everywhere. And then if we want to reform the institutional culture of civil society, that might not necessarily be reforming civil society. That's my first area of questioning. The second area of questioning is the question of power relationships. So power is organized in many ways in our society. It's organized through class. Some people have spoken around the involvement of lower class, middle class, upper class, and that's reflecting a critique of society organization. Some people look at institutional organizations, whether there's distribution of power between centralized forms of government to local forms of government, accountability in terms of use and distribution of resources, and so on and so forth. So also looking at organization of government, organization of political parties, organization of participation within those institutions is a practice of democracy, and one does not negate the other. So you can reform the civil society organizations while you reform participation of young women in direct nominations at political party level, and none doesn't cancel the other. The middle class, whoever they are, because there are many statistics that show they exist. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. They are thin. They are fat. They have power. They don't. We've read many reports around the unicorn of the middle class. My hope is, if indeed moving a big section of citizens from poverty to a place where they can afford to live in decent lives, to have electricity connection, is making the middle class, then the project of democracy is to make as many middle class people out of its citizens as possible. So then there can be a shared characteristic of the population. Going back to Jelimo's, so that is my second question. How do you look at the organization of society in your own critique? And Bishop, I guess he's come back. He raised the question of the discussions between dominant political parties of dominant countries that we often compare our political cultures to. And that goes to the same question of Jelimo, who says that I should probably further demonstrate how to build around a norm, around norms and political culture. So for Bishop to reference that some Republicans do not recommend that the population votes for their candidate, it's a political culture. And it's a political culture that's based on norms that every leader has everyone has a conscience, and their conscience is what should influence their vote. And hopefully the votes matter. In our context, how then do we practice? How do we practice liberal democracy? Because I guess the context that Bishop is raising is a context of liberal democracy. Kenya particularly has tried its hand at liberal democracy, where we have one man for one vote. And we hope that our leaders are elected on popular majority. That is not the case in the United States. One man, one vote doesn't work there. So are we the role model for the United States? Because they have a collegial system that overrules popular vote. So in essence, the question of a political culture should be the consensus, the fair consensus of the citizens. And my assumption is that Jelimo is a Kenyan. And indeed, how do we improve the political culture in Kenya? And we've seen attempts, official attempts at reforming political culture. One of them has been to streamline the financing of political parties by making them public institutions that are funded by the taxpayers. And if they are funded by the taxpayers, they are audited by the public, and their policies are held to account, hopefully by the Auditor General, and also that they reduce the idea of campaign financing. And that's one way of starting to reform political culture. We've seen that a long time ago, every party had wanawake na, wanawake wa PNU, wanawake wa tano tena, but now it's by law that there has to be representation at political level, at local level, at Senate level, and at National Assembly, a given number of seats that is uncompromising. And so gender representation now is a norm in our country, that indeed, as you elect a leader, you must consider as a party to have an elective position for young women. So the next question is, how do we make that a shared norm so that it's not the girlfriends of, and even if the girlfriends of the political main dominant political leaders become leaders, they are leaders in their own right, not out of tokenism or favoritism, so that we can continue to expand these practices into the people we are. I'll end this TED Talk by giving one scenario. When I was in primary school, I remember there were many engagements for kids, and maybe I'll be revealing when I was in school by saying that there was a 4K club that really cared for agriculture, for soil erosion, and we started building in our kids connection to the soil and to our natural environment. There was a wildlife club, and I remember going to count animals every Saturday morning. Of the first Saturday of every month, we would go to different national parks, and we would be walking with rangers to count our animals. And until now, it's one of the most memorable relationships I've had with our national parks, because as a child, we went counting, and I don't know how well we counted the animals, but at least we participated in that as young people. There was a Scouts movement and the Presidential Award Program that helped us to do volunteerism. We went and cleaned clinics. We volunteered in old people's homes, and all these programs were trying to build an active citizenship. And the people who went through this, deep inside, you find that they have values of active citizenship. They care about a thing or the other, and that has gone to define their adulthood. That to say is that we already have models in which we inculcate values amongst one another. The only thing we don't do is that we do not use these models where it matters most, like in our politics, in our in the areas that we think that are critical for our national life. So I hope I have answered Jelimo's question and also answered the question of partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Always good to see the different voices, like your insights make us also think harder, think more critical in terms of what then democracy looks like. And I read a comment here from Chiku Ali, who says, I think George's insight is quite necessary. We need to redefine democracy to integrate our culture, start exercising democracy at grassroots, specifically at household level. The best way to move towards a solution is by identifying the basic strengths. We have plenty of future. So I think as I keep listening to this discussion, what is coming out is that it's about our values, our norms, our culture. That is what is really coming out. Whichever norm, whether it's a political culture, whether it's in the household. And you brought also a very interesting dynamic discussion here, George, in terms of the difference between institutions, and because we keep talking about building a very vibrant civil society, but then what is the difference between organizations and organizational culture? And I reflect on a lot of work that we do as Forum Civ. The feedback we always get is that we should not NGOize some of these industries and sectors at the grassroots level. People just want to organize and work. So there's been a lot of critique or feedback in terms of as we organize ourselves. It's important that you point at the point of when people go out there to fight democracy, sometimes they are limited because you go in as institutions and not just as organized groups of individuals who are seeking to have change. So as we move the discussion forward, and Bishop, welcome back again. I'm glad to have you again. We hope the network will allow you to stay with us to the end. So we want to move forward to our final set of discussion in terms of what more can we do as relevant stakeholders, as partners, in order to accelerate this discussion on Drive for Democracy. So I'll begin with Karen.
Thank you for the question. The first thing I mentioned it earlier, but I wish to mention it again: continuous civic education. Continuous civic education is important. Education of the mind, of the heart, and intentional education to help the citizens understand their role, their duties, their responsibilities, their power, their place in a society, like our constitution talks about, we the people. That civic education, continuous civic education, is critical. We must continue with continuous civic education of all groups of people. Children, even at the family level, we've talked extensively about the place of family as like the cornerstone of our society. So just having these conversations also seep down through the family level, at the family level, is very critical. So continuous civic education of every group and every sector within the society. That is one. Number two, we must encourage governments to hold free and fair elections. In the African context, I know this is crazy. This is funny. It's almost naive, but you know it is possible to hold free and fair elections and have election management bodies that care about the public, that care about transparency and accountability, and that care about information to the public. That can be done, and we must be able to build stronger institutions such as election management bodies to just make sure we have free and fair elections. And maybe my final point would speak again to that, because it's about growing leaders. But point number two, essentially encourage free and fair elections. So then even people can participate actively and constructively, knowing that my vote counts. Right now, I think across board, many people are like, does my vote really count? Why should I vote? Why should I be involved? Why should I be an observer? Why should I care to know? You know, so definitely that is critical. So if we can build that culture of free and fair elections, and of course accepting the results of the outcome, I think that will be critical. Number three, promoting open governance is critical in this journey, where, for instance, we normalize the culture of wealth declaration and actually question some of the holders of public office, where the wealth came from, and just understanding how that has grown. Because right now we have many people who hold public office who suddenly became wealthy and rich. In fact, let me say rich, not wealthy, because wealth, you can see wealth is generated. You work to create the wealth, but then riches, sometimes they just come. So some of these people have just become rich suddenly. Where did that come from? So the culture of wealth declaration, but also just ensuring transparency and accountability in the utilization of public resources, that needs to be encouraged, but also the role of civil society in terms of monitoring this and evaluating this and publicizing this would also really play a key role in terms of advancing that. The other point, number 4, for me is implement the constitution to the latter. I know right now in Kenya, we have the clamor to change the constitution, this and that, but to what extent have we been able to implement that constitution? It's a great document. It has great principles and outlines, and we just need to implement and uphold the constitution to the latter. That is critical. Number 5, strengthen institutions of governance. Individuals, I have observed in our society, and I've also observed this in other African countries, because that's where I think my work has revolved around. We have strong men and women, mostly, of course, men. We have strong men, but not strong institutions. You have a man at the helm of an institution, and then they plan the resources, or they collapse the institutions, or they go away and the institution just dies like that. But how can we build a culture of building strong institutions, the legislature, the media, and different aspects of society, just building strong institutions, because then that is the cornerstone of good governance in society. And now that brings me to the bottom line of everything I have shared in terms of way forward. For me, we need to grow leaders. We need to grow leaders. I think, I can't remember who it was, but one of us said that we don't have leaders of integrity. Maybe because we have no integrity, but I believe it is possible to grow leaders of integrity who will get into whatever sector, whether private sector, public sector, political space, community leadership, whatever it is, and practice good governance, practice accountable leadership, be accountable, listen to the people, pass policies that are people-driven and results-oriented. It is possible. And that is what we are doing at Emerging Leaders Foundation, growing the next generation of African leaders who are values-driven. I look forward to a time when we will have leaders in different spaces who are just driven by values and the desire to see society change, the desire to see every man, woman, and child living in dignity, because that is possible. But then right now we have dealers, most of them are dealers in positions of leadership, all across board, not just in the political space, across board. Many of them are just dealers. You know, let's cut a deal, let's make this money, let's inflate this budget, let's call this donor, foreign donor, whoever it is, of this country to come into the country and sign some deals, some funny dealings. And oh man, it's bad. Like, I look at how COVID billionaires in Kenya, and it is sad. It is sad watching people lose their lives because they can't access quality medical care. It is sad watching kids wander and, you know, wallow in hopelessness and helplessness because they can't access quality education. The inequality in the education sector, in the healthcare sector, basically across board, it's sad. And it's all a question of leadership. Can we invest our emotions, our work, our networks, our everything in growing this brand of leaders that will be courageous enough to call wrong when they see it. They'll be courageous enough to say no, even when temptation comes for them to make money. They will be courageous enough to say, you know what, my legacy counts. I want to stand for the right thing. That requires nurturing, role modeling, mentorship, coaching, and we can do that. I look across this panel and I see amazing people who are doing some really amazing work, and we can be able to generate many, many more leaders across generations to pass on the leadership baton, to just make sure that our society gets to thrive. Like John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on leadership. So let's grow leaders. Let's invest where it matters most. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Karen. Quite very strong views there, especially on leadership and growing the next generation. I've picked something there. Let's not grow dealerships, let's have people leaders. Yeah. So Bishop, back to you. And I know you double up as a religious leader, but at the same time, again, you're very active in the political space. So what more then can we do to be able to accelerate the drive for democracy?
Yeah, I think the important thing that my young sisters talked about is there is need continuously to have civic education, regardless of the age. You have politicians now that will go to the rural part of the country and make it a certain, a republic, meaning that the urban becomes where those who have everything would be able to decide. And yet, where we were born, people are left behind. I am one of those that is looking forward to a leadership, praying that by the time the Lord calls me to his glory in death, you leave leaders who have been tested. We have young people in our countries that can do quite good a job as far as the driving the political will of a given country can be. But they get frustrated. They talk about civil society itself. Let Africa graduate to an extent that if a civil society group or a leader of that civil society group gives an opinion, stop demonizing them. I'm praying for a day that can be
Okay, we seem to have lost Bishop again, but again, we've picked his points around continuous civic education. He agrees with the sentiments earlier on by Karen, and also just practicing true leadership and being able to hold each one of us accountable. So Oji, I'll come to you in terms of what more can we do as relevant stakeholders and partners in order to accelerate drive for democracy.
As civil society, I will perhaps be repeating a little bit what I have said already. As civil society, we need to be flexible. You've mentioned the organization forms or forms of organizing. We need to be more flexible about this. Regardless how people organize themselves, we should be supporting that organization. Be more flexible when it comes to partnerships, be more flexible and more dynamic when it comes to outreach to citizens, when it comes to advocacy towards government. The second perhaps is related to the first one, and that is to stand firmly on the values. While we are flexible in how we organize and with whom we cooperate, we should stand very, very firmly on our values. The example I have mentioned about the Catholic Church in Belarus, siding and protecting protesters, that same Catholic Church was a couple of years ago in conflict with civil society. Because of they wanted to build a church in a public park, civil society stood up against it because it wasn't done in a transparent way. However, neither of those sides took offense from this confrontation because they both stood for their values. Civil society stood for the values of transparency, and in a later example, church stood for the values of protecting people. And this is the for me, very important example of standing on the values, but cooperating when need be. And the third one, I can only repeat what Karen already said. Education, education, education. Non-formal education, broadening horizons of people, especially of young people, even of children. Even if it is, George was talking about from the household point of view, who is doing the dishes? How do you choose which movie to watch after dinner, but also on the societal level, educating people about their rights, educating about opportunities, and making sure that they are not bowing down to pressure. Thank you.
Thank you, Oji. And I just want to read a very interesting comment here from Kennedy Onyango, who says, so long as the tap is still leaking, we shall always wipe the floor. So long as the poor governance continues to bedevil Kenya, or basically the Kenya and any other state, we must strive to do continuous civic education so that the democracy grows and develops. Bishop, I see you are back, so I want to, internet has been unkind to you. I want to allow you to make your sentiments as much as the internet allows you, about 5 minutes as we get to the end. Welcome, Bishop. I think he's not, he's on, it's not mute, he's muted. Please unmute.
Hello?
Yes, now we can hear you. Please go ahead.
I was saying, I was joining Karen.
Okay, we will wait for internet to be kind to Bishop. I welcome George. George, please, what more can we do as stakeholders at the same time as you, then we go around to do our closing statements. George, welcome.
Thank you. I am following this conversation, and I am quite proud to learn from everyone who's speaking, also including our listeners. Thank you for this engagement. In terms of my contribution, I like to include a time perspective in my aspiration. My mother, God bless her soul, only about 25 years ago, could not wear trousers. She almost got fired from her job at a renowned bank for wearing a trouser suit. She almost got divorced for driving a Land Rover and wanting to ride a motorcycle. Only 25 years ago. Today, it's high fashion for very corporate women like her at the time to wear suits, albeit developed for her work, to banking and to private sector spaces and government and so on and so forth. It is not unimaginable to see a woman flying military jet planes, not just driving a casual home vehicle. And so to speak, brings a perspective. And the perspective is that culture and indeed democracy develops over time. And while I am alive in my time, I can do what I can do, and hopefully another generation will take it up and advance this practice, which we call democracy or democratic living or democratic values. So my hope really is to, through my work, is to stir into action a generation of thinkers, creators, activists, prophets, who can envision ideas and create that which is not created. Because for my mother, today, if she were alive today, she would be living in a different space. But someone created today, and hopefully she had a role to play in that, by refusing to not conform and to continue wearing her skirt suits or her trouser suits to work. By doing this, we shall help stimulate shared civic culture, a shared language, and ultimately shared values. And it's from the place of shared values that then we can have a perfect democracy. I believe that we can become a better democracy because of thinking about democracy more widely as if it's our own culture. We can have a vigorous economy because our values allow us to share. Our values allow us to be generous. Our value allow us to even not take a profit so that someone else can get a meal. That we can have better responses to the public space than we think we can. We can be healthy individuals. We can live today, but also create room for those who will live tomorrow. And deep down, that we can continue learning, we can continue correcting ourselves, celebrating our small victories, and creating and recreating our life together. Because in my opinion, democracy is an ongoing project. And it's not just a project about governance, it's a project about how we live our daily lives. Thank you.
Thank you, George, for those sentiments. Yeah, we have to keep creating and recreating because democracy is a continuous process. I see a comment here, and as I welcome Bishop, as much as the moment you come in, I give you the space, and then we continue as we conclude. Our viewer here says, I agree with the panelists that education is important, but we have been doing this for a long time. How can we do it differently? Bishop, your comments on that as you also give your sentiments?
Well, I think my appeal would be for the young yourselves to really raise up and take up, the challenge. What we are doing ourselves really is to destroy what is already existing. We will have no future in this part of the world if at all you allow those that really that they have run the race to continue leading you. In Africa, for example, we become a playing ground. People that have never been tested in power, as long as I do not know about your country, as long as they can have a cheap material with their face on and give you a bag of 12.5 kg of meal, you vote for those people. As a result, our leaders are not cooked, they are not prepared, they are not there to lead. Just like I said, most of them is employment rather than to serve. You come up and be strong and say, time has come when we should grow our democracy in Africa, and this we have not done. Like Karuna said, you need civic education. You need to educate my mother in the village to say, look, the vote is your right, but vote wisely. Not an MP that will just come and tell you lies, give you all the language you want to hear, give you all the money that is obtained through corruption, and buy you just for that visit. Once he is elected into parliament, you will never see him again, and development never takes place. As a result, our resources are being plundered, not being plundered, are being stored on daily basis. Because the leaders that we have, they go around churches, they even buy us church leaders by simply giving you, I do not know in other countries, a big a brown envelope. And for you, you glorify them. You never ask them to confess to say, stealing and troubling people, it's a sin. A COVID that has come our way, it becomes a lesson. But even without money, our leaders in Africa, they are not ashamed to steal from us. So it is time to bring an end to that. We have people with energy of your age who should be able to say, it is time, Bishop Mambo, go and dream dreams, and we shall translate them and act. Because talk about development. Which development are we talking about? Someone who did not, I'm going back again, who was selling in our country, who was selling on a black market, selling a currency, for example. 2 days later, you find that person is filthy rich to an extent that the electorate are forgotten, and the church will never say a thing. And this is where I have a problem. And you want to use God and use him in vain. This is why we have crisis, which is man-made. God bless Africa and open your eyes, take a stand, Karen, you are right. We need the civic education. Yes, of late, people lose life, but it's time we say enough is enough. Talk about Zambia today, we have discovered what we call a gold, but the majority who are digging that gold are cadres, and those cadres don't even look at the suffering of the community where that gold comes from. So you leave them poor, and the riches are here. I'm happy with countries that are demonstrating peacefully to injustices, things that they are not happy with. And God is happy with such. Bless you all.
Thank you, Bishop, for those sentiments. Again, just the importance of civic education and going on and moving on and allowing space for the young people to take up. And also civic education, not just at the highest level, but also going to the grassroots. I read a comment here from Armstrong Alaro, who says grassroots organizations are immensely working on carrying out collaborative intergenerational platforms of discussion, which is an aid to building and field bridge in democracy. So it's very important to go to grassroots. So we are coming to almost to the tail end of this. I want to, as I thank our viewers for participating and also for sending in their comments, I want us to give to just have our closing statements on this discussion and the power of dynamic partnerships in defending democracy. So I welcome Oji to give your closing statements.
I apologize, I've muted myself. The only thing I can really say that at the end that democracy is never achieved. It is a continuous process that never stops. In this process or in this struggle, may I say, we need support from everyone that can offer it. And more of us are committed to this struggle, the easier struggle will be. It will never finish, it will never be easy, but at least will be easier. Thank you.
Oji, very simple. It will never be easy, but it can be easier. So it is continuous. Karen, your closing statements?
We have power as citizens and as individuals to make a change in our nations and to define the destiny of our nations and our own destinies. We, the people, have the power. You have the power, I have the power, and we have the voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. George, your closing statements?
We are reminded that the individual can do great things, and even much more if individuals act together. We can unravel the tensions between our need for autonomy as individuals and responsibilities that come with belonging to a group. And these are the tensions we've been speaking about. We belong in groups. We belong in tribes, in social classes, in generations, in faiths, in counties, in nations. I think the practice of democracy is definitely perfecting this tension between our need for autonomy and our responsibilities, especially when we benefit from being and belonging in a group. Democracy truly can only thrive in a condition of negotiated freedom. Negotiated freedom for citizens to create, to self-define, to experiment, to explore the world of the human mind and the spirit, and to take responsibility over their own lives. The idea of democracy for me is the power and the ability for individuals, as individuals, but also in groups, to take responsibility over their own lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George, for that. Bishop, I welcome you to give your closing statements. I know you already called us as young people to continue. But give us your closing statements. Bishop, you're muted. Bishop, please unmute. Okay, thank you.
Catherine, you're muted.
Okay, now I'm the one who's muted. Thank you. I say thank you so much, Bishop. We've picked your sentiments and for soldiering on despite the challenges in communication and on the internet. So I want to just take this opportunity to thank you all, to thank our panelists for the participation. I see Bishop is back. I don't know whether we can hear you. I would really love to hear his closing statements. Bishop, are you able to unmute? Okay. Okay, so I think we will bring the discussion to a close, and I think the key message here is democracy is a continuous process. No country or institution can tackle these challenges on their own. We have to forge ahead. We have to form these partnerships. We have to continue in these partnerships and continue working together and be ready to challenge the status quo. And it's only that when we do that, that together we can be able to fight for democracy that is truly of the people, by the people, and for the people. So thank you so much, Karen. Thank you, George. Thank you, Oji, for bringing your insights from Belarus. Thank you, Bishop Mambo. We shall be following up on discussions with you again. And thank you so much, our viewers, for the engagement and for following our discussions on the hashtag Defending Democracy. Keep going. And we invite you, as I said earlier when we began our discussion, that we have a series of events planned the whole week. So please join us and join us the rest of the week. Tomorrow we discuss democracy in the times of COVID-19, the gains, the challenges, and the opportunities. So welcome tomorrow and see you in our next session. Thank you and God bless.